All right, I'm going to take a quick poll. How many people in this audience are voice programmers? We got a few. How about Twilio programmers? Few more. If you were a Twilio programmer, you're generally voice programmer. Finally, call tracking. Who has built a call tracking application? Couple. Okay. Back in the back, an expert. All right. Well, I'm going to make a bold assertion by the end of this talk, if you pay attention, which can include whipping out your laptop and programming along with me. You will be a voice programmer, and you will be able to do telephony programming such as making a conference call app and call tracking. So that's our goal of the talk. During the talk, if you start off here, you can give some feedback. We display this at the end. One thing I learned is to text the @ symbol. It's @213 to that short code, and I'll display it at the end. So once again, that is the goal of this talk. It's actually to go over the basics of Twilio, what Twilio is as a concept, have you look at it and touch it. Some of the talks have been very high level, JavaScript snippets. We're going to actually do some Twilio development. If you're an expert at Twilio and you've built call tracking apps in the back, maybe the best ones, you can watch this talk and you will probably be able to walk away and teach somebody else what Twilio is, because it can be difficult to do that. And we're going to do the demo use case of call tracking. This is the basics of a Twilio app with voice, programmable voice application. So that's the agenda, and I'm going to talk about voice programming. I myself am a voice programmer. I've been for many years. I've done call centers in the past. At times when it did take 60 days to buy a number, 30 days, if you were rolling out a call center, you would have a spreadsheet with your timeline based on when you could get voice communication in. And things took a long time. Projects would go on for years. I was on one at Bell South and AT&T that had a $200 million budget for a voice call center. And that still goes on today. You could be a voice programmer today using really fancy, expensive APIs, but it did change around 2008 at the time when Twilio arrived. And I did that animation myself. Thank you very much. Twilio arrived. And it did change things when Twilio arrived. It made things different. Some of the biggest differences that Twilio brought to the scene is instant provisioning of telecom resources, being able to do it instantly instead of waiting 60 days. Using web programming techniques to control telephony. As I mentioned, I had been in the telephony voice programming game, and we bought expensive hardware and software to do it. You could do it, it was just complicated. And so allowing web developers, any developer, even a non-technical person, to do voice programming is the goal with Twilio, and it really worked. I was in the business, it wasn't obvious to me that was a really important way to do telephony. But Jeff Lawson knew that, and it turned out that allowing web developers to do telephony programming can have some surprising effects. So to get into this, actually the majority of my talk is going to be coding and showing you some Twilio stuff instead of slides. So I'm going to do that now. I am going to get out of the presentation mode here and go over to my web browser. I haven't really seen this on stage. We'll take a look. It looks pretty good. Who has a Twilio account? All right, that's pretty good. If you do not have a Twilio account, sign up. And if you do sign up, you'll be looking in your account, and you'll be seeing something like this. The first thing I'm going to do is buy a number. One of my favorite demos with Twilio is just this, as simple as this. No JavaScript APIs. I could buy a number anywhere of 50 to growing number of countries. As soon as I could search in states, as soon as I search for a number, in this case I'm going to look for maybe the first local number I see in Queens. I could take a toll-free number, I can do SMS and voice, but the minute that I buy this number, it is usable. So we went from 60 days to 60 seconds, and this is a live number. The big tenet behind Twilio, as I mentioned, is web programming. So taking a telephony event, an inbound call to this number, and doing a webhook. So a webhook is going to an external system to get your instructions. And if you did do this, we go to a URL, which is demo.twilio.com, welcome voice. You can see some markup here. It's human readable. I was showing this to my daughter this morning of what an open tag and a close tag was, and I think she pretty much got it, although she got mad at me, different story. This has say tag, play, and pause, and I would encourage you in this talk to go ahead and make a phone call. I'm going to do it now. Let's see. 1929-244-4344. So, go ahead and do that. I'm going to ask a few.
URL to change this message.
So
let us know if we can help you in any way during your development.
That's it. We did provision telephony resources. We went to a web server. We created some voice control, and you are now a voice programmer. Now, what if you wanted to change something from a simple voice command and a say verb to, how about some conference, a global conference call? So I'm going to go to Twilio Labs, something you may have not seen. This is just a demo site. You can do a few things if you have a new Twilio account. And I'm going to demo doing a conference. Actually, I'm going to write a conference from the ground up by writing TWIML. But if you go to Twilio Labs, you can do things like conferencing, other things. So I'm going to write some TWIML in the browser here. And I'm going to say dial. And I'll do a conference. And I'll call it Twilio Conf. And if I make mistakes, please shout them out. Oh, that's a good point. In this case, it doesn't matter, but it's a good point that Twilio names your Twilio conferences with a dynamic name, and it's kind of a cool feature, a really cool feature. So when I click on this URL, this is just a shortcut. You can make your own web server to create TWIML, or we just dynamically generated some TWIML. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to put it in my phone number. And if I save that phone number, if anybody wants to call in again, the call is going to go there. It's going to go to its instructions, and you should be in a conference. I'll just test it because I don't always do it right. So that's one way to do it. And I'll put that. I should be in a conference. If somebody else joins, I probably am going to hear them. Hello. Hey. I'm going to hang up, but you don't have to. We all might be in a conference. Now, one other technique that's really important as a Twilio programmer, you're not often generating TWIML in a browser this way. The most common way to use Twilio is to create your own web server, generate your own TWIML, have programmatic control of it. So I'm just going to go over that technique really quick. I have Ruby Sinatra. Anybody used Ruby Sinatra? Couple people. It's just a simple web server. It's great. It's really readable. In this example, in the code, you can literally read what it does, I showed this to somebody the other day, and they said, I was afraid of coding. It seemed complex, and this looks really simple. It is simple. This is a basic Ruby server. This responds and creates the exact same thing that we just saw. And this is another way to do it using our helper library. It generates the same thing. It generates some text that comes out of a browser. As simple as that. So here's my server, and I'm going to start it on the command line. Let's see. So I have a server running here, which is the same code. If Twilio wants to talk to this server, I have to allow it to talk to my laptop here from the cloud. So I'm going to do that with a tunneling service called ngrok, which was written by a former Twilio guy. And so now I have an open URL that I can point to get Twilio to do a conference with its TWIML. So I'm just going to do there, conference, save. And that is the very basics of Twilio. That's touching it, feeling it, making calls, buying numbers. If you've done this a million times, nothing new. If you haven't, it might be good to see what, the basics are. Now, I'm going to go back into the presentation mode for a second and just do a quick recap before we go to the next step. I didn't mention, and I didn't actually know before I got to Twilio, even though I was a voice programming guy. When I was at Twilio, my view of what Twilio was for the first while was writing TWIML and writing a web server. I did find out that there's an enormous amount of complexity in the back end of what it takes to run a global telephony network. So that's kind of the point of doing something. This doesn't even show as interesting as a thing as we did of a conference. Conference has this global stuff going all over the world, but as a developer, you purely wrote some code. So I'm going to go into the next section of the talk, which is call tracking. Does anybody know what call tracking is? I'm not going to make you tell you, so yes, thank you, Connor, in the front. A few people do, but I'm going to define it for you because it's a simple thing. In a business term, it's being able to advertise a phone number, get a call to that number, and understand why the person called it. The same way if you think about an advertisement of a web advertisement, when you advertise a website, you know why somebody clicked on it and you can track it. Before call tracking, your business is probably getting phone calls in from billboards and buses, and you don't actually know why those people called. So call tracking is the simple practice of using some techniques to get a phone call and send it into your web app to track what's happening so you can really understand why that's happening. It's a growing field. We have some great partners who built complete call tracking apps on top of Twilio that you can just buy without coding. I'm going to code one from the ground up here. That's just going to be a very simple one. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to show some mock HTML phone numbers, and then we're going to track those and analyze them with an analytics program. I will allow questions and cat calls during coding, comments, anything you want to do. All right, so where were we? We had a Twilio phone number, and we were creating a conference last time we looked at the code. I'm going to change this code to do a little something extra. So I'm going to do get the root. Oops. And so when we get to this page, we're going to go here, and we're going to do ERB index. And this is a Ruby Sinatra thing that says pull up the index page. And the index page I have already written, just not to bore you. And it has just basic HTML, some list of pages. So I'm going to see if that works. And when I change things right now with Ruby, I restart. There's other ways to do that, but I like to restart here. OK. So here's our call tracking page. You can imagine if you get a phone call on this page, or if you see pretend it's ads on Google or something. If you call this number, and I hope some of you do, you should probably see it fail. Because we don't have anything to handle an inbound call from Twilio. So I'm going to go the basics of handling an inbound call from those phone numbers. So I'm going to write post call tracking do. Oops. OK. So this is where Twilio will send a call from those numbers. I'll show you the config later. And I'm going to do something. I'm going to do a debug message that just lets us know, hey, we got a call. And I'm doing a lot of exclamations so I can see it in the console. And I'll pretty print the params. Oops. So when Twilio posts to your application, it's going to pass a bunch of parameters. Yes? Thank you. Params. Thank you. Thank you for the Ruby Sinatra person. Params is something that comes in with Sinatra, which is a bunch of parameters from a web server. And if you can spell it, you can print it out. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Does anybody know the difference between a get and a post? I'll just say some of you don't. Get is when your web server goes to a page. A post is when you do a form on a web server and send it to the server. I didn't know that at a certain time. Twilio is going to post parameters here. I'm going to restart. And we'll call one of these numbers, and we'll look at the terminal to see if we get parameters. Anybody want to call one of these? It should, OK, we just got a call, but it's going to give you an error because we didn't actually respond with anything. And as we called, we're getting new parameters in, and everybody is probably who did call is getting an error. Now, gee, I'm going to hide these numbers. We're getting a lot of calls. So this could be considered the basics of call tracking. You got a phone call, and Twilio sent a bunch of parameters to your web server. You would have access to these web parameters in Twilio via the REST API. You could go through your logs. You could look at them. You could download them. But I'm going to, in the next stage, do a little more interactive saving of those parameters, put them in an analytical program so we can look at them. If you look at what the parameters are, I think people are still calling. This is amazing. We can see like called is one of the parameters. So this is what number the caller calls, and this is Twilio posted this to the application. So I'm going to go ahead in the code, do something like create a variable called. So I just took it right out of the terminal. That's what gets sent to me. And then why don't I reply with a valid Twilio response? This is, I like to copy more than write. So this will generate some TWIML, which says welcome to Signal, and put you in a conference. Real call tracking app, you might do that, or you might send it to an agent. You might send it to a browser phone. It depends on what you want to do. So this is the call tracking. We're going to get a call. We're going to use a parameter. We're going to respond to Twilio. I haven't saved it, so. And then let's do something else. Let's use a analytics program. So I'm going to require Mixpanel. Oops. Mixpanel's cool. It's a web program here. It is generally used for web analytics, so let's call it Signal Live, and I'll create a project. And then when I create the project, I instantly get this token, which is usable. Mixpanel is, it's not a Twilio program, to be clear. It's an analytics program most people use for web tracking or anything they want. OK, so we have Mixpanel going, and then we will we'll do tracker equals Mixpanel tracker.new, and we'll use that new token we just created. So that's one thing we could do. And then when we get a call, we can send this event off to Mixpanel. Track, and we can use a user ID. We don't really have a user ID for this demo. I can use the key name. How about we're tracking phone calls, which phone calls you get. I'll use the key name for the number that was called. So I'll go ahead and do called, which is our variable we just created up here. And then I can put some data in it. Params, which I cannot always spell. So we have that. I could pause to see if this works, because God knows if it will. And let's see. I will call this. Hey, I'm in a conference with somebody. Hey, Dan. This is cool. It's looking good. Let's look at the live view, and we'll probably see some of these calls are already being tracked in Mixpanel. Now, I'll go ahead and hang up on that. And we're at a conference. And I'm going to do one other thing. Might as well do this. I could run reports on each of those. Kind of a cool thing is when in this analytics program, we can see a lot of data about the call, all those parameters. As you can tell, I didn't do any extra work to get those. I just grabbed them, threw them in the database. I'll do something that's only slightly more realistic in the real world is I'll put labels on those phone calls. And usually you would, if you're doing call tracking, you're going into your database, your CRM system. In this case, I'm just going to do a real basic version of put a label on those. And I'm going to copy it because I don't want to code it from the ground up, but I will explain it to you. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just do a little key value pair here, and I'm going to take in our call tracking phone numbers that we have and give them a label. So if this key name comes in, the ones that we're advertising, we're going to call it Thirsty, Walk on the Beach, catchy slogan. And then I'm going to, when I insert it, I am going to do key name called. How about that? So that's it. Like I said, in the real world, this would probably be more of a database dip. So I'm going to restart this. And now we can do our real-time test to see what people really prefer in here. Now, we have a bunch of calls in there, so we'll see how they go. But the more people who participate, the better. You're all going to be in a conference, which is going to be crazy. And God knows that maybe the server here is getting requests. If you call these numbers, if you like to get lots of food, call 415. If you like long sunsets, call 855. If you're thirsty for a beer, 620. And we'll run some analytics to see what people like more. Over here, I'll do segmentation and maybe a pie chart. Boom, there's our data. So a lot of people are thirsty. Some people went for a catchy slogan, and yeah, that's it. Let's see if there's any differences. Yeah, still coming in. And I'll just go into the next section here. So to recap, voice has been hard in the past. It's pretty easy as a web programmer. Using Twimlets, Twiml Labs, API Explorer, Ruby Sinatra, things make it easier. And importantly, call tracking app that I showed you here is like one thing you can do for your business, but the whole point of web programming with telephony is that there's a million things that you can do. A lot of them were talked about in the conference here, video, voice, CRM integrations. The thing that you don't always get when you're listening to those is you think you download and package that. You actually build it from the ground up like you saw here. You have to make it happen with Twilio, and you can use some creative resources to do any of this. We touched the very tip of the iceberg of one part of Twilio Voice so far. And you can send some feedback. If you have questions, I'm happy to take them, discussion. Yeah.
Are there any questions in the audience?
That's good. Oh, we got one.
Hi.
Hi.
What would be the ideal scenario for database structures if you want to create your own databases in Python or MySQL?
So that's specifically for call tracking or just in the scope of computer science? I could go on for days here.
No, specifically for Twilio and the voice messages and
Yeah. Well, one thing you noticed is when you got posted parameter, it depends on what you're doing. Call tracking is probably one of the most simple things, right? You noticed that I took parameters in from Twilio that was posted and just sent them to to Mixpanel with no, so that kind of key value store with no schema is really useful in a lot of cases in Twilio. As you go up the scale of what you're doing in complexity, for example, a call center app, you need to know agent state, their presence, their availability. That's where you might need a little more structure to what you're doing. But a key value store that I kind of demoed here is a real handy way to do it. You get a key and you update it. And so this NoSQL approach is a common one, certainly not the only one. In the back.
In your call tracking example, you had those parameters there. Do you allow custom parameters?
So there's certain places where there's custom parameters. For an incoming call, Twilio, again, it starts with a real voice call. It goes to Twilio, and then Twilio sends that to your app. So my application is the first time that I really can be involved with that. There's other places to generate, requests and webhooks. One of them is through Twilio Client. So if you've used Twilio Client, you start a phone call in the browser. And in that case, you can actually send custom connections as you create it. Specific to call tracking, that's a common request because sometimes you want to have your web layer kind of set up something that then gets matched up with a phone call. And that can be done with a lot of programming foo-foo. But Twilio, if it's getting a phone call out of the PSTN network, only knows about the phone call and then sends it to your app.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yep.
Just to follow on, can you talk a little bit more about what you can do in Twilio Client?
Yeah, Twilio Client's awesome. It's voice in the browser, it's WebRTC. A lot of the demos today kind of jumped, if you saw the keynotes, into Twilio video, and that's an extension of Twilio Client. But with almost no effort, matter of fact, I'm tempted to demo it. I could make a phone call. I won't code it, I promise. Here's an app I built on Twilio Client. It's got to boot up off Heroku. Please don't look at the web page, the URL. This is a little browser phone I wrote, and I could make a phone call from that browser phone and make an outbound call in the world. You could have an ad that doesn't have a big phone panel, but actually says call me now and starts a phone call in the browser. So it's really awesome technology, really easy to use. We have quick starts that allow you to go to the Twilio Client homepage, do a quick start, and have something like this with not much more effort than I did today programming. Sorry, I can't hear you. Did I tell you not to look at this? I know you guys are going to look at it.
And in that example, in the ad, you could pass those additional parameters.
Yeah, and if you guys are looking around for a business idea, I would talk about interactive voice ads because a lot of people have not gotten into that. Businesses present phone calls, but they're too scared to present a call me over the browser. Try it. It would something that actually could work where the customer is talking on the voice call directly to the agent with way more context. Yeah, absolutely. You could send unlimited context from the ad to the other side instead of a phone call.
That's all the time we have for questions. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.